Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming here today. Thank you. We have Dr. Yasser Abu Jamia with us on the line. He's calling from Gaza. He is the director of the mental health program in Gaza, and he doesn't have good connection. So we have introductions and few things we want to do at the beginning before we start our program. However, the exception is if Dr. Yasser connected, because we don't want to lose him. If we can get his voice from Gaza, we want to do that. So let's see if we can get him.
Hello, good afternoon.
مرحبا, good afternoon دكتور ياسر. معلش تشغل الفيديو تبعك علشان نحطك على السكرين. We can hear you. تحط الفيديو on ولا صعب؟ إذا حطيته on ما بنقدر نسمعك. دكتور ياسر. دكتور ياسر.
إذا شغلت الفيديو صحيح.
Please go ahead, Dr. Yasser.
You have to choose.
You know what? You don't need to put the video. We can hear you. Please go ahead. How are you? We just lost him. Okay. So without further ado, here's our stellar medical student. She's the engine behind this event. I give you Noor.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here, and thank you, Dr. Ansari, for everything you've done to make this event happen as well. And thank you all for being part of this important conference. My name is Noor Saida, and I'm a first-year medical student in the MD PhD program at Harvard and at MIT. I want to start by acknowledging a few things, most importantly, some of the emotions in the room. Some of you, like me, might be feeling a bit anxious, and some of you might be enraged, disappointed, and helpless. And some of you might be hopeful that this is a start of something good. This is the start of meaningful change. And many of you might simply be curious and wanting to listen and to learn. In this room, we come from all walks of life, and I mean it, but we share this one thing in common, which is we all feel the moral obligation to be part of this discourse. Some people in this room already protested in the streets of Boston, and some of you made it to DC on a couple of occasions already. In this room, some of my peers have relentlessly and tirelessly have been calling their representatives. And in this room, some of us have published op-eds and journal opinions and articles. And while some of us might have only recently, maybe a few weeks or a few months ago, actually learned what Gaza actually is. And as we go through today's talks and panel discussion, I ask that you make room for these differences. I ask that you make room for our varied connectedness to Gaza, and make room for the pain of whoever is sitting next to you. This means having the willingness to listen, to learn, to critically engage, and to engage with respect even when we disagree on some fundamental things. Our 2 live Q&A sessions are meant for really hard and insightful questions, but they're not the space to make statements. We have 2 amazing Palestinian speakers, keynote speakers today here, who have sacrificed more than I can ever imagine to do the profession that I hopefully will be able to do one day. They are upholding their duty as healers. And many of us are lucky to be able to call them colleagues today, or maybe in the future like me. Today they are taking on the burden of us. And so in respect of our panelists and speakers' time and sacrifice, I kindly ask that you keep your phones away for the duration of this event if you can. This event is recorded and it will be available as an educational repository online, so there's no need to record. And to keep our audience's safety and to make sure that this is a safe space for everyone, please refrain from taking pictures or videos. Any pictures taken by the organizing committee will be of the panelists only and of the speakers only. Thank you. I trust you, and I mean it, and I trust our community. And so if you see something, please gently nudge the person next to you or let us know, one of the organizing committee team. For some among us, the connection to this topic is deeply personal. So if you feel overwhelmed at any point, please feel free to leave the room until you're more calm. And I also want to redirect you towards the Ombuds officers that will be present in this room as a resource. They will be most likely putting you up there. Their names are Melissa and Lisa. And they are independent of Harvard or of any institution. They are confidential and they are independent. And they are here as conflict resolution specialists and de-escalation specialists. I hope that you won't feel the need to reach out to them, but I assure you they're a wonderful resource if you do feel the need to do so. And before I turn the mic over to Dr. Shekhau, is he around? Yes, hi. It's imperative for me that I also recognize the immense privilege inherent in our ability to convene today in a safe space with food, with water, shelter, warmth, and intellectualize human suffering. Each one of us here present today holds a certain level of privilege. For those with affiliations to healthcare and human rights, our privilege lies in our capacity to influence, to drive change, initiative, to teach, to learn, to mobilize efforts, to raise awareness and advocate on behalf of those who may not have this extraordinary platform that we have here at Harvard. Though we will be far from solving this today, we can leverage our privilege today, and most importantly from today onwards, to work towards a more equitable and just world where the principles of health and human rights are accessible to all. Thank you.
It would be ideal. Like it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Before introducing Dr. Abul Aish, I wanted to offer a few brief remarks on behalf of the organizing committee about the stakes in Palestine and Gaza for the profession of medicine. I do so as a scholar of Middle East history who's worked mostly among medical doctors for the last 25 years. A recent Hebrew essay, the Palestinian musician Tamer Nafar stressed the importance of keeping two pains in our big hearts as we tried to come to terms with the events of the last 3 months. He went on to point out, though, that empathy with the pain and trauma of Jewish Israelis after the October 7th attacks, while necessary, means standing in a long line of leaders of the Western world and the international media who've embraced Israel emotionally, politically, and militarily. Meanwhile, he wrote, those same actors ignore our pain and have funded its erasure from time immemorial. Israel's assault on Gaza and its 2.3 million inhabitants is only the latest example of this inequality. Over the past century, the Palestinian people have lived through organized violence again and again. Argues, there has essentially been one long war since 1917, when the British Foreign Office promised the same territory to two national groups in hopes of extending Great Britain's imperial footprint. Throughout this extended humanitarian crisis, Palestinians have played host to many physicians and other members of the healing professions. They've removed bullets and stitched up wounds, treated the infections of those who fled as refugees, and tried to address the psychological pain of people whose memories of childhood were colonized by explosions. So just as Palestine has been a test case for the current system of international law since World War I, it's also been a test case for the national groups inhabited the same territory between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River. Would their sovereign interests be treated in the same international system? What? Okay, we're going. I see. Yes, yes. Well, we'll ignore the slides. I think that would be easier. A cursory glance makes clear that they have not been. Meanwhile, the human casualties among these two people have been similarly disproportionate. This is just a slice of the last 15 years. As we can see from the current situation, they have not been. This systematic failure to uphold the principle that every human life has equal significance highlights the self-imposed limitations of medicine as a discipline. For the last 3 centuries, medical doctors rose to the top of the professional hierarchy through their insight that key physiological processes operate the same way in all human bodies. But the political, ethical, and practical correlates of that insight too often fell by the wayside. As Louise Ivers and the late Paul Farmer put it in the context of Haiti, another country ravaged by colonialism, we have the tools for prevention and diagnosis and care. What we lack is an equity plan linked to a delivery system. Gaza in January 2024 offers a shocking example of the way that delivery systems for bombs are outcompeting delivery systems for healing. Professor Abul Aish has spent his career resisting that destructive inequality. As a leading activist for human rights and coexistence, he's the recipient of 19 honorary doctorates, as well as numerous prizes, including, to name only a few, the Meritorious Service Cross, the Walter Reuther Social Justice Award, the Order of Ontario, the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal, and the Mahatma Gandhi Peace Award. Professor Abul Aish was born to a family that fled in 1948 to Jabalia refugee camp, north of Gaza City, from the demolished villages of Houj and Dimra, just a few miles away. He became the first Palestinian OB-GYN resident at Soraka Medical Center in Beersheba, then went on to graduate from the Harvard School of Public Health, serve as an official of the World Health Organization, and join the staff of Sheba Hospital in Tel Aviv. During the 2009 war in Gaza, Professor Abul Aish suffered an unimaginable loss when the Israeli army killed 3 of his daughters, Hassan, Mayar, and Aya, along with their cousin Nur, in an artillery bombardment. His 2010 memoir, I Shall Not Hate, describes how his grief and recovery inspired a commitment to forgiveness as a means of conflict resolution. I Shall Not Hate has now been translated into 23 languages and adapted for the stage in German, French, Spanish, and Arabic. Since 2011, Dr. Abul Aish has been a professor of global health at the Dalla Lana School of Public Health in the University of Toronto. As we hear from Dr. Abul Aish and his distinguished colleagues about the past and present catastrophe in Gaza and the rest of Palestine, it's essential for us to maintain an inward critical gaze. What have we as health professionals done so far to intervene in conditions of structural violence and dehumanization like those in Gaza, which contravene all of the canons of medicine? What has impeded us from intervening? What are we going to do about that? Thank you very much, and please join me in welcoming Dr. Abul Aish.
Thank you so much. Thanks to the organizers for this event, and thank you all for coming to send a message to the Palestinians in Gaza Strip who are alive now, to say to them, we are thinking of you. We are with you. But we want to send them a message We will never rest or relax till this bloodshed stops. And that's the action. That's what we need as a medical doctors, as a gynecologist. When I see a bleeding woman, what do I do? Not to go to talk to her. I have to rush to infuse her to stop the bloodshed. And that's the urgent priority we need to do. And for me, as a Palestinian refugee who was born, raised, lived, and still my family and my house are in Jabalia refugee camp. The Jabalia refugee camp resonates everywhere in the world. As someone who tried to forget and to deny and to neglect or reject the Palestinians issue, now the Palestinians issue and every corner in Gaza Strip, including Jabalia camp, including El Fallujah, including Tel Zatar, it entered every house in the world. It became the world's critical and central issue. I am a son of a Palestinian parents who are refugees and survivors of the 1948 Nakba. We are challenged the whole of life as Palestinians, and it continues. And the Palestinian suffering is man-made. And that's what I see it. That's where the hope begins. And what can we do to unmade it, to be determined, not to give up, and to continue to believe in our rights. Humanity is facing challenges unparalleled in history, and the world in which we live became less peaceful over the decades. Even though we are now in the 21st century, it seems mankind hasn't learned the lessons. We still have nations, countries dominating, oppressing, and occupying other nations and countries. We still have parties, factions, media, and administrations who want to control how people think and how they live. Conflict that we talk about and we teach people about it arises when we violate someone's honor, dignity, rights, freedom, equality, and we destroy both their self-esteem and their self-respect. And that's what is happening back home now. The history repeats itself, and we say always, never again, as we intend to repeat it again and again. And that's the message we want to send. If the bones of the dead speak, why the living keep quiet? Biased, not only biased, indifferent, even complicit about the killing of the Palestinian people. In Gaza Strip, what they are facing now, it's mass murder, mass destruction, mass displacement, and mass suffering. And how much of war do we see on the screen? That's what we watch. How much of the suffering do we know about in our world? Eisenhower said, who was a president, as many other presidents, as the current president in the same job, a nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. I can add, we are in a world that we have a human, spiritual, ethical, and moral bankruptcy. My life as a Palestinian refugee from Jabalia camp was a war. And this war, we speak about post-traumatic. It's ongoing. It's ongoing, continuous, cumulative, persistent existential threat. As a Palestinian, proud Palestinian, as life increased, my aches, my pain, and suffering. At the same time, life amplified my maturity, awareness, and stamina, hardness, what we call it in Palestine, sumud, and didn't allow all the difficulties to give up my rights. And most important, not to forget my loved ones. And from where did I come? I found myself as the Palestinians now in a life as a challenging, as a raging and wild ocean. And we speak about war. What is war? Is it the soldier who is going to kill and to be killed and destroy? It's our children, our women, our grandchildren killed before they are fully adults, or being disfigured, wounded, or mentally scarred for life. Palestinian children are not allowed to be grown up, to be mature, to achieve their plans. It's hundreds of thousands of human beings killed and taken from life before time. It's our children, parents, and loved ones seeing their bodies, limbs blown off of their bodies. It's about the innocent people who are separated forever from the loved ones. War is a genocide. It's a torture. It's a propaganda. It's dishonesty and the slavery of humanity. War is not to be documented and to be watched on the screen. War as a disease is to be prevented. What are we going to say? Each of you, and even the political leaders, what are they going to say to their children or grandchildren when they watch or hear about the killing of the Palestinian children? And no one knows the war as the one who is burned by the fire of war. Our Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish said, "He who looks at the sea doesn't know the sea. He who sits on the shore doesn't know the sea. Only he who immerses himself dives, takes risk, and forgets the sea in the sea." As a physician, I learned what is life and death actually mean. When a human being died, I saw the hope in the newborn baby I delivered, and I saw the killing of my daughters, Bisan, Mayar, Aya, and my niece Noor. And it's important to see them. This is Bisan, Mayar, Aya. Bisan, if I have 100 of these young women, I thank God and I am proud of them in their life and in their death. And I am here because of them. I am accountable to them and to God. I see them talking to me. I see them in every Palestinian child in Gaza now. What did you do for us? I send them a message from here. I didn't forget you. I will never give up. I will never rest, because I fully believe one day I will meet them. And I want to meet them with the big gift. And that gift is the justice for them and for the people of Palestine and others in this world. And that their holy souls and noble blood wasn't waste, and it will never be waste. It made a difference in others' lives. This is Mayar, who was #1 in math in Palestine. She planned to be a medical doctor. I see her peers who are medical doctors now, even health professional doesn't provide safety to Palestinian doctors who are killed on daily basis. This is Bisan. That I said to Biscan, she was about to graduate from the university. But this is the challenge of our life as Palestinians. It's written on us just to suffer and to see our loved ones 31st of October. Because the number even, it didn't stop at my daughters. Until now, the number is climbing as the number of the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. 31st of October, 21 members. My nephews, my nieces were killed. Doctors, engineers, physiotherapists. We as Palestinians, we invest in life to educate, and they are not what they call human shields. No one will accept his children to be a human shield. We cut from our mouth to educate our children because we believe someone can take everything from us, can occupy, can oppress, can kill, but no one can prevent us from dreaming. And Palestinian people are big dreamers. I am determined to inject, to infuse hope instead of despair, and the blood of Bisan, Mayar, Aya, and Noor to be injected into that to defend humanity. October 7th, it didn't come out of the blue. The world wasn't created October 7th. And that's what we need to understand, and we need to ask why all of this happening. When we have a patient who is suffering, we ask what made the patient sick. We need to ask 10 times why. Gaza Strip before October 7 was hopeless, lifeless, jobless, lightless, helpless, freeless. But what about Gaza Strip now? It's homeless, it's airless, it's waterless, even foodless, helpless, and even warmless. That's the situation. What else is remaining? The people, they say, those who are buried, and they a privilege to have a funeral for someone. It's a privilege to have a funeral for someone, or to recognize the dead, not to be killed in parts. So when we speak about traumatic stress disorder, it's not. Both the stress is continuing. No one nation on earth has been tested as we have been tested as Palestinians. We are tested on daily basis. Even for me, as a Palestinian Canadian, when I travel everywhere, they want to recognize me and to identify me as a Palestinian. I am proud as a Palestinian when they see me, and to say, take a side. For us, as Palestinians, our home, our country, our history, our culture, it lives inside us, move with us everywhere we go. No one can take it from us, or stop us, or disconnect us. No one can erase or deny our existence. We as Palestinians, we are human, and we all love and cry. No one should be killed. to get his or her freedom. No one is free as long as others are not. So we need to replace the bloodshed with freedom, with justice for all. Jesus said, seek the truth, and the truth sets you free. So you need to advocate for the truth. Truth goes side by side with responsibility. It's time to prove by action that the Palestinian blood is not less than any other human blood. I ask all of those leaders in this world, Palestinian people are determined and they want freedom, rights, and life. As the Tunisian poet Abul Qasim al-Shabi said, if one day a people desire to live, then the fate will answer their call, and their night will then begin to fade, and their chains break and fall. Let the sound of shells and the planes be silenced, and let us hear the voice of humanity and the cries and the groans of mothers, children, and the sick, because any free person will refuse to die silent. Let October 7 be an opportunity. In our life, we have priorities. The priorities in life is not the past. The priority in life is the present and the future. And we all are accountable. The present and the future are our children. What legacy do we want to inherit our children? I hope we all come together to speak loudly. Dignity for all, justice for all, freedom for all, enough bloodshed. It's time for the Palestinian people to enjoy their freedom, their rights. And we as Palestinians, we don't want to delete anyone. We want to be acknowledged and to live as others. Thank you. God bless you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
دكتور ياسر انت online. Ilana, Naftali, and Steve, if you wouldn't mind coming, and Qayyum. And can we have more lavaliers? Is Dr. Yasser on? He is. Can he speak? We can let him speak before we talk briefly. Yeah. Dr. Yasser, just left. Okay. So I don't think there is an eye dry in the audience right now, as it did. Thank you. Thank you for this very moving presentation. And thank you for being here with us, coming from Canada. And thank you for speaking on behalf of your daughters and behalf of the Palestinians and behalf of people in Gaza. Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Iman Al-Khadra Ansar, a Palestinian daughter of Palestinian refugees from 1948. My father was born in Safad, in the north of Israel right now, and my mother was born in Haifa, also, which is part of Israel now. I was born and raised in Saudi Arabia, and my first time going to see my father's town and my mother's town was not until 2019. I was 45 years old. And I was very moved going to see it. And I was very moved seeing Al-Aqsa Mosque. And from there, I decided to get in touch with Steve, who's one of our panelists, and I'll introduce him in a second. Steve Sosebee was the
president, and he's the co-founder of Palestine Children Relief Fund, one of the organizations that have been working for 30 years and counting in Gaza and in Palestine, throughout Palestine. And I started going there for medical missions. As an intensive care unit physician, I would say trust but verify. I trusted a lot of things I've read, but it wasn't until I went there and verified and saw things for myself that I realized what's going on over there. And how if I think it is fair for my son, Tamim, to get a certain level of care here in Boston, I think every child in the world, including Palestinians, including the people I came from, deserve that level of care. And I started going more and more. And that's why I feel it's my moral duty as a physician, it's my moral duty as a Palestinian, and most importantly, it's my moral duty as a human to help and bring the same level of care that we get here in Boston to the Palestinian people. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining me. I'll start by introducing our panelists, and after I introduce you all, we'll give everyone a chance to tell us how they're connected to this topic. So starting with Dr. Ilana Feldman. Thank you so much for coming all the way from DC. Dr. Ilana Feldman is a professor of anthropology, history, international affairs at George Washington University. She's the author of Governing Gaza, Bureaucracy, Authority, and the Work of Rule, 1917 till 1967, and Police Encounters, Security and Surveillance in Gaza under Egyptian Rule. She's also an author of another book that we will have, and she would sign it after the event, Life Lived, basically about your experience in Gaza. Thank you for coming here. Next is Dr. Qayyum Ahmed. Dr. Qayyum Ahmed is South African scholar who teaches health and humanitarian right advocacy as an assistant professor at Columbia University, Mailman School of Public Health. He also leads the Health and Human Rights Certificate and is affiliated with the Global Health Justice and Governance program in PubFam. You served, Dr. Ahmed, as a special advisor on the Right to Health and Human Rights Watch, supporting the development of a global health strategy for the largest US-based human rights organization. You also were the Chief Executive Officer of the South African Human Rights Commission from 2010 till 2015. Thank you for being with us. Dr. Izzeddin Abu Laish, everyone introduced you so far, but I'm going to say something very Palestinian, quintessential Palestinian about him. When I first spoke with him, I was introducing myself as Iman al-Khadra, and my husband is Ansari. And I thought like I'm talking to a Palestinian from Gaza who lives in Canada. And he said, just a second, Khadra, are you related to Samih al-Khadra? And I told him, yeah, he's my dad. And he's like, I know him. I work in Saudi Arabia briefly, and I know your father. So we're all connected somehow. Even, a Palestinian from Gaza who lives in Toronto is related to a Palestinian who grew up in Saudi Arabia and lives in Boston. Thank you so much again for being here.
Thank you.
And next is Steve Sosebee. So Steve is an all-American gentleman from Ohio.
Is that a compliment?
Yes. There's so much good about America. I'm proud to be an American in so many ways. But I'm speaking for what is right because I'm an American. And you did the same. So Steve is an all-American who loves baseball and football and came from Akron, Ohio. He started as a journalist in Gaza. And then he co-founded the Palestine Children's Relief Fund, which is, if you would think of MSF or you think of other international organizations, they care about so many causes. PCRF cares about Palestinians in Palestine. And it was built and sustained and continues to thrive now 30 years and counting. And I had the pleasure to go to Palestine on medical missions through the PCRF with the help of Steve. So thank you, Steve. Thank you for being with us. And finally, my fellow intensivist, Dr. Naftali Kaminsky, and my dear friend as well. He's the Boehringer Ingelheim Endowed Professor of Internal Medicine, and he's the chief at Yale University School of Medicine. Before, he was a tenured professor of medicine, pathology, computational biology, and human genetics, and the Dorothy Richard Simmons, I'm saying a lot of stuff, endowed chair of pulmonary research at Pittsburgh. And before that, he also was appointed at the head of functional genomics at Sheba Medical Center in Israel before being recruited by Pittsburgh, born and raised in my mother's hometown in Haifa, right? Not too far from where my mother was born. Welcome here. So we'll start with Dr. Feldman. Dr. Feldman, you lived for a couple of years in Gaza, and I learned this morning that you brought your car from the US and survived the driving. But please tell us, how was it living in Gaza, and what did your experience teach you?
Thank you. Is this on? Okay. I should note, it was a very, very different time that I spent a lot of time there. The first time I went to Gaza was in 1990 when I was an undergraduate, actually doing research for my undergraduate thesis. To Gaza from where I was in Jerusalem, I took a shared taxi from Jerusalem to Gaza City, which is, of course, unimaginable at this moment. And then I went back as a PhD student and spent 2 years doing research, looking at Gaza actually not through the lens of its experience under Israeli occupation or its experience through relationships with Israel, because Gaza and Palestine more generally has a broader history than that. That is crucially important to understanding Gazan experience, but it's not the only thing. So I wanted to frame my research to open up to some of these other kinds of tentacles of life experience. And actually, maybe that leads me to a couple of points that I wanted to make. I think, as most people in the room are health professionals, most of the people that are on the panel are doctors or health professionals, and will speak, and we've already heard from Dr. Izzeddin. We'll speak about the health aspects of what is happening to Gazans and the need to address that. I want to just highlight a couple of other issues in which the health crisis unfolds that I think we also need to be aware of, and they're looming at this moment, but they're not only of this moment. So I would highlight three other kind of acute dangers facing Gazans, and that have for a long time. One, isolation, two, displacement, and three, kind of humanitarianization of their situation. So on isolation, this is a 75-year dynamic, and I think it's crucial to remember there was no Gaza Strip before 1948. Gaza was a district in Palestine. The Gaza City was an important city as part of Palestine. So the separation of Palestinian territories from each other, the sort of bisection of Palestinian life, and the separation of Palestinians from each other, it's taken different forms at different moments. It has been a persisting part of the experience of Gaza from 48 on. And of course, over the last 16 years, Gaza has been under a punishing blockade and siege. And now we know what is happening there. And I think we need to, in thinking about a different future, one of the things that needs to be addressed is this ongoing isolation. So any kind of resolution to the health problems and to the threats to life needs to address isolation. And holler when I start to get to
No, go ahead. So basically you're talking about the devolving situation.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't like that, it keeps getting worse. And I think this is a theme that you will hear today. Every time we feel that it can't get any worse, it does get worse.
And we need to address the ways in which Gaza has been isolated. Its condition can only really improve if that isolation is transformed. Displacement is another past, present, and potentially future challenge facing Gaza. And so Gaza, again, is produced by the experience of the massive displacement of Palestinians in 1948. 100,000 people were made refugees to Gaza, an area that there were about 80,000 inhabitants before 1948. And there has been, during the period of Israeli occupation from the beginning of 1967, efforts to force Gazans, either entirely from the Strip or move people around within the Strip. So as we hear calls for humanitarian response, I think we need to be wary of some of the strategic political aims in trying to, under the guise of humanitarianism, to move Gazans out of Gaza. And the lessons that Palestinians know for sure from 75 years is that when you move for safety, the chances that you get to return to your home are very slim. So this is an ongoing issue. And then just briefly, the third, that there are massive humanitarian needs in Gaza that must be addressed. And Gaza is not a humanitarian problem. It is a political problem that requires a political solution. And if we don't keep an eye on that, we risk, even as we address necessarily acute needs, of participating in some way in the ongoing degradation of Palestinian life.
Your message is think beyond humanitarian aid, basically. Thank you. Thank you, Ilana. And I have to say, this is the Palestinian concern about displacement is something that we drink in the milk. So I started going to Palestine in 2019. And every time I go, I'm like nervous, excited, as if like I'm seeing my child after a long work day or something. And every time I get out, when I'm in the airport, in the airplane, flying back, I cry. Because we don't know if we'll be able to go back in. And this is not because it's realistic. Maybe it is realistic, but it's because this is exactly the story I heard from my parents. Yeah. دكتور ياسر أنت معانا هلا؟ فيك تحكي؟
موجود بس يعني ممكن التحدي تتخلص إن شاء الله، مش مشكلة.
تفضل دكتور احكي.
خليها تخلص.
لا هي خلصت دورك. Please go ahead. So with us is Dr. Yasser Abu Jameh. He's a mental health specialist in Gaza and the director of the program over there. Please go ahead, Dr. Yasser. Share with us your thoughts.
Okay. Thank you very much. And
sorry, I think Nouri, the connection is not the best. Thank you, Dr. Yasser. If we can get the video, if Noor, you can get the video from him, that would be helpful, so we can hear his message. We can't hear you consistently, Dr. Yasser. Yeah. So, Dr. Ahmed.
Do you hear me?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, there is a delay. Noor. Yeah, if we. Yeah, thank you so much. So, Dr. Ahmed, please share with us your thoughts from a human rights about Gaza before until now.
I'm trained as a human rights lawyer in South Africa and specialized for a long time. I mean, disillusionment with the international legal system and the international humanitarian system has increased exponentially over the last few months. And I try to make sense of what's unfolding in Gaza and in Palestine, almost in the same way that you do. And I noted your references to a number of poets and poetry. And suddenly, having studied Shakespeare in high school, I'm now revisiting lots of poetry and have been attracted to and drawn to the poems of Palestinian poets in particular. And there's one that has become very prominent over the last few months by Rifat Al-Arir. And he starts his poem by saying, if I must die, let it be a tale, let it bring hope. But he also adds that if I must die, you must live to tell my story. And of course, the poem, I think, the poem for me conveys sort of two main ideas. The first is that Palestinian life has essentially become defined as the anticipation of death. And I think it speaks to a sense of disillusionment with the systems of power in place that decide who lives and who dies. And part of this problem, I argue, is the failure of the international community. And you're talking about 75 years of the declaration of this was adopted. And just in December last month, we celebrated of the UDHR while completely ignoring the ongoing 75 years of the Nakba. I think part of the challenge for me conceptually is how we define peace. And when I look at UN Security Council resolutions, it's quite peace has become nothing more than the necropolitical management of death. And I think part of the problem is the way in which peace is defined. It's often defined in terms of violence. Peace is, in some ways for Palestinians, it is the last meal before an execution. And I think that the way in which we think about peace and these international human rights concepts must be completely reimagined. And drawing on Palestinian ideas and ways of thinking, I think we need to reinfuse a new way of thinking about international law. As you know, as a South African, I'm particularly proud about the fact that we brought the case before International Court of Justice. I just heard that on Friday, this coming Friday, the provisional measures decision will come out. And it was amazing. I was in Cape Town in South Africa when the ICJ case was going on. I live in the old slave quarter in Boerkaap, where every wall is covered with Free Palestine or mural of Palestine. And then you return to the United States, of course, and it's a completely different situation, especially at Columbia, where I teach, the first institution to ban Students for Justice in Palestine and Jewish Voice for Peace. And so I think what we require is this idea that you articulated, this idea of dreaming, of imagining, of reimagining systems of power. And I feel like this conversation can hopefully contribute to that reimagination process.
Absolutely. So we are doing this mostly sponsored by the Global Health. So the Global Health Department at Harvard is our home here at Harvard Medical School. And one of the founders of this department is Paul Farmer. And he said the idea that some lives matter less is the root of all that is wrong in the world. And I think we're here to say Palestinian lives matter just like anyone else in the world. We don't want to matter more, but we shouldn't matter less. Thank you. Thank you. Victor, as did Jim, from your book that made me cry and cry and cry. It's a great book. I hope everyone gets it and reads it. It's an important read. It was an important read for me as a Palestinian. Something very prescient you mentioned in the book, and the book was written in you said Gaza is a human time bomb in the process of imploding. All through 2008, there were warning signs that the world ignored. The election of Hamas in January 2006 increased the tension between Israelis and Palestinians, as did the sporadic firing of Qassam rockets into Israel and the sanctions imposed on Palestinians as a result by the international community. So we're seeing the train wreck, and from bad to worse, from bad to worse, from bad to worse. However, you have hope, and you want a free Palestine. what do you mean when we say free Palestine? Because it became such a polarizing term, if I would not say weaponized term against Palestinians. What do you mean when we say, as Palestinians, we want to be free?
When I
He
say,
has, he has the left here.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Because it's important. I see it about Gaza, and we are talking about Gaza. Gaza is part of the, and we need to deal. When we treat patient, we treat a full patient. The doctor who is treating the disease is a failed doctor. We treat a human beings, and we are dealing with a Palestinian nation. And that's what we need, where Gaza Strip is part of the Palestinian, future Palestinian state, the future free Palestine. And that's what we need to deal. For me, the free Palestine based on the international law and the rights which are stated by the international community, and we accept it. So we need order in this world. Be above the order. That's why we live in a discordant, biased, indifferent, and even sometimes, I can say, I lost faith in what we call human rights conventions. They are grinding water. They are talking about it in a selective way and imposed on whom? On just the weak, based on a political agenda. And that's what we need, a reform in our world in order to have order, this order, all should really to be treated equally. And mostly start with the powerful countries to implement these international laws. If they are violating these international laws, what do you expect from others? They will follow them. And there are great examples in this world. So free Palestine, that personally, I would love to see my children are safe, free, with dignity, as anyone else in this world. As our neighbors, the Israeli Jewish people, I am not, as I said it, we don't want to delete anyone or to deny anyone's rights, but we want to acknowledge our rights to be free as others with dignity. And we have history, we are a nation. And when you speak about hope, when I went to Canada, my worry was about my children. I am Palestinian, but I lived in Gaza. Gaza is part of the future Palestinian state I aspire to. I am not from Gaza, only the Jabalia refugee camp, which brought me as a refugee to live, but I am loyal, my life is there. So when I went there, I was worried about my children. And I remember it. We have to listen to our children. The Palestinian children, they can teach thousands of political leaders of this world about life, about humanity, and that they have to listen to the Palestinian children. My daughter Sada, she was severely wounded. She was severely wounded. She was studying day and night during the war, the bombing, the shelling, to be one of the top 10 in Palestine in the high school. She was severely wounded, treated at the hospital where I am working. Wounded 16th of January. 20th of January was her birthday. So what can I do? Said, Shada, we have to celebrate the birthday. We are Palestinians, we love life and we want to live, but give us the opportunity to enjoy the life. With the bandages over her eye. And her right two fingers were semi-amputated. She said, too, if I can't see with my right eye, I have my left. If I can't write with my right hand, I have to start to practice with my left hand. She spent 4 months at the hospital. And high school exam in Palestine, it's a national exam from all of the curriculum. And no one experienced what she passed through. 16th of September 2008, her mother passed away of acute leukemia. Then 16th of January, 3 sisters and niece were killed and she is severely wounded. She did the exam. I didn't expect much from Shada. The day they announced the result in the radio, they announced it there. She succeeded as nothing happened to her. 96.5%. She graduated from the School of Engineering, University of Toronto. And that's the message we want I see it in my son Abdullah, who was 6 years when he came to Canada. I want him to be Palestinian. Not to forget from where did he come? A Palestinian student. He went last year to teach English in Spain. So I called him. I saw Palestinian flag in his room. I said, from where? He said, I took it with me. I said, I don't need to worry about him. Palestine is with us and will continue alive. And we are ready, in spite of all of the challenges, we are ready to start from zero. But I say it, this zero should be accompanied, should be linked, attached with the freedom, with justice, with dignity and rights. No peace, no freedom in this world as long as Palestinians are not.
Thank you. دكتور ياسر فيك تحكي دكتور؟ I think the connection is challenged, Noor. Yeah. Steve,
Hello.
tell us. You traveled first to Palestine over 30 years ago, and you saw things that changed you. And I think you went to Gaza initially, right? You were reporting in Gaza. Can you tell us about what got you invested in the Palestinian healthcare and health?
Thank you, Iman. So I first went to Palestine during the first year of the first Intifada. I went as a student activist. I was very interested in the Palestinian cause and the cause of justice and freedom all over the world, in places like South Africa, wherever people were struggling for freedom. I think we as Americans have a responsibility always to stand on the side of justice and freedom. We lose that frequently in this country due to many reasons, but nonetheless, it's a core aspect of who our national identity should be. And in many cases, we aspire to be that. I became very much connected to the Palestinian cause because I think if you read objectively the history of the Palestinian issue, you understand clearly that the root cause is the displacement and the subjugation of the indigenous population of Palestine. And until there is freedom and until there is equality in Palestine, there will never be freedom, or there will never be peace for Jews and Arabs in that land. And whatever work I've done for Palestine, I'm very honored, an Israeli and a Palestinian here. As an American, I think my purpose in life is, I think, working for freedom in Palestine is also working for the freedom and peace for the Israeli people as well. And I hope that that's a message that all of us understand when we talk about Palestinian rights. It's not at the expense of the Israelis. So you asked me, I had a chance to see firsthand, and what changed my life when I went to Palestine for the first time during the first Intifada was to meet to such a harsh and terrible occupation, which in comparison today is not nearly as bad, but at that time was very difficult to see, coming from a free country where we have rights here that we take for granted quite frequently. Going to Gaza and seeing the refugee camps, going to Jabalia for the first time in December of 1988, and seeing the poverty, the open sewage, the congestion, the kids everywhere, but also seeing the spirit of the people and the unity and the courage and the humanity, and meeting people like Dr. Izzeddin, who, despite what they've gone through, and his story, as tragic and hard as it is to hear, and we all empathize with him as human beings, the fact that he's kept his humanity, I think that's what makes him most Palestinian, because all of the Palestinians I've met in my life, they've kept their humanity. And he's a perfect ambassador and a representative of his people, because despite what they've gone through, and none of us can possibly imagine his suffering, he's kept his humanity. His heart is still pure. He still loves. He still wants peace. He's hatred in his heart. And that to me is the very symbolic of the Palestinian people that I've met. And I just want to acknowledge that and say thank you, Dr. Izzeddin, for that courage and that symbolism that you represent to all of us. Going there and seeing that, seeing how harsh the occupation was, and the courage and the humanity of the Palestinian people that I met every single day there, inspired me to go back. And once I finished university and went back to work as a journalist, and in the course of working as a journalist there, I went there as a journalist to kind of share the stories of the Palestinian people. I don't feel in this country, especially 30 years ago, that what life was like for the Palestinians' occupation was being represented in our media. And I wanted to share them and hopefully bridge that gap of information. This is before the internet. And during the course of working as a journalist, I met a lot of injured children who were missing limbs, who were suffering from gunshot injuries, and that were needing medical care they couldn't get. And my initial interest, and continues to this day, is to serve the Palestinian cause. And of course, I think from a political point of view, everything in Palestine is political. Healthcare is political. Education is political. Water is political. The clean air is political. Everything is political. So any contribution that you can make to improve the quality of life and the services of improving the life of the Palestinians in any context is a political act. And my contribution to the Palestinian people, I hope, simple solidarity for the struggle of freedom and equality. So I decided to start arranging medical care for kids for free, and to get them treatment that they otherwise couldn't get within their country. And it was a way for me to show my solidarity that not all Americans stand with the policy of our government, that not all Americans are in alignment with the occupation or blindly supporting Israeli policies, which are against the interests of the Israeli people as well as the Palestinians, of course. And in the course of the years, built an organization which started to impact the health sector significantly. And I felt that was my best contribution. I think within the avenue of direct political action, although it's important, and I encourage everyone to continue to let the world hear our voices of solidarity and support for the Palestinian people, I felt I could better contribute building an organization that would help serve the Palestinian people in a constructive way by improving the quality of healthcare and addressing gaps in areas within the health sector that were in need of the kind of support that improve the quality of life for people there. Professor Feldman just mentioned briefly three main factors that are facing the Palestinians today. I agree with exactly what she said. The isolation is one. And I've started a new organization called Heal Palestine. And the point of this organization is to utilize the resources that we have outside of Palestine. The Palestinians have among themselves the most educated and developed diaspora population, one of them in the world, of people like yourself, Dr. Iman and Dr. Izzadeen, of highly skilled, highly trained engineers, doctors, accountants, lawyers, professors, whatever field they are. And we're not utilizing and tapping into that resource to bridge this isolation of Gaza, where you have 2.4 million people that are cut off from the rest of the world. Well, in 2024, there's ways to overcome that isolation. And I think it's our duty and our responsibility, and not to wait for others to do it, but take that ownership ourselves to break down those walls and bridge that gap and bring the resources that exist outside of Palestine into improving the lives of young people there, and particularly the next generation that have to rebuild Gaza and take it into the future. So one of the areas that we're going to be working on is developing a mentorship program that links communities outside with the need of young people there and give them the opportunity to be independent. Again, what Professor Feldman mentioned, this humanitarianism. We don't want the next generation of Gaza kids to be dependent. The kids in Gaza are exactly like Dr. Izzadeen said. They're smart. They can teach us about life and courage and sacrifice and humanity. We need to give them the opportunity to be independent and take care of themselves, not to be dependent on others. And that's what our goal is as we move forward in the organization. What we're all missing, I think, these days is a sense of hope. That when you see this genocide, you see now that 1% of the children in Gaza, 1% have been killed in 3 months. And 3% of the children in Gaza are now permanently harmed, physically harmed. And the nation of Gaza is traumatized to the extent that they may never be able to function in what we would call normal in their lives, the rest of their lives. They've experienced such extreme trauma in the last 3+ months that what is it going to take for us to help heal them? It's our responsibility to show them love and compassion and real impactful efforts in all aspects, whether it's health, which we'll continue to work in, whether it's developing the education system, because as you all know now, the whole academic year in Gaza is shut down.
Yeah.
And that's not by accident. I mean, it is a reflection of the circumstances on the ground, but we always know the most important thing for the Gaza people is education. They're educating their children. Because in 1948, when they lost all their villages, they lost all their towns inside what is now Israel, the only thing they could take with them is their education, which they took to Kuwait, and they took to Saudi Arabia, and they took to the Gulf area and built those countries. And Palestinians know that education is the key for their success and for their future. So this targeting of education is also a target of the Palestinian national movement. So rebuilding the education system is something we need to work on and be focused on and work together on. We have the talent all over the world of some of the most advanced in this room. I'm sure every one of you would like to contribute to rebuilding the education system in Gaza. All we have to do is tap into that. So there's so many opportunities for us let's not feel hopeless. Let's
Yeah.
use our energy in a positive way to rebuild Gaza and show the people there that we stand with them and we're never going to give up our contribution and our support for their struggle for freedom.
Absolutely. Thank you. I see today as like, it's the first time we come to Palestinians, Jewish Americans all together to talk about what can we do for Palestine. And this is the beginning. We're learning and we want to take the learning into action and to help. And action will be now, tomorrow, the day after. There will be a lot of building to be done. Naftali, Dr. Kaminsky. So you are connected to this work as well. And tell us what got you interested in the Palestinian healthcare and helping the Palestinians as an Israeli from Haifa.
One is I did not choose it. I was born in Haifa, right?
Mm-hmm.
The reason I was born in Haifa is because my parents were Holocaust refugees, right? I never met anybody in my father's family. They were all killed. When I listened to Izzadin, I hear my father, I hear my uncles, the ones that I did not meet. My mother was a little bit luckier, so her parents survived, but the same thing. Most of the people she knew as a child died. And for my parents, and they were not easy to live with because of their experiences. My mother grew up with hunger, which means we're all fat in our family. Because if you lose weight, you're sick, right?
Yeah.
And in some ways, the notion of never again was never limited to Jews in our family. And the recognition that our miraculous salvation was a terrible disaster to other people was always never far away in my family. So I had no choice. It's not something that it's not a hobby. But I want to say something which is important. When we look at people now, and then I'll go back to a few other things, but when we look at people now, there's huge division. And we hear really good people say horrible things. I have American Jewish friends that said things that in normal times, that's it, I would never meet them again. I've also had some Palestinian friends that said things like that. But because of my root and my way and the experiences of my family, I know that even in these terrible times, there is hope. When my mother was 13, World War II was ending, and they were evacuating, and they arrived to Munich. Munich was destroyed. She looked out of the train. It was in rubble. So she was a child refugee. She never sang, although she started dancing in the train coach. My grandfather said, oh no, our daughter is crazy. And she asked her why, and she says, oh, they're in rubbles, they deserve it. So my grandmother sort of said, no, in Yiddish, she said, they're human too. That's it. In the late 90s, no, actually in 2010, I got an award in Munich, one of the most prestigious awards in my life. And I brought my mother. And she asked me to drive near the train station. And she looked around and said, look, everything is built and it's so beautiful. And I'm so happy for them. And one day I hope that Israelis will be able to be happy for the rebuild of Gaza and the freedom in Palestine. I also hope and Palestinians to be happy for peace and quiet in Tel Aviv. So that's where I come from. And I think we all need to remember this point of hope, even in the lowest points of humanity. People were able to come out. But we are the sort of the infrastructures that should allow it. Now, I am also, of course, a physician, and I do fibrosis research, scarring, and we deal a lot with death. And that also gives you hope, because you can see that sometimes you can reverse things. as long as you put your mind to it, as long as you work. More personally, as an Israeli growing up in Israel, I was always a little bit doubtful of things, but then the main thing that changed me, and I'm really grateful, are actually people like Israel that were generous. They were brave enough to share their experiences, even when I was a little bit Israeli arrogant, or even when I sounded racist. They didn't walk away from me. Instead, they kept me with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think many of us who are in this room owe it to our sort of, yeah, you're oppressed helps you to stop being an oppressor.
Mm-hmm.
And I really think that this is an important lesson for all of us. We have to be able to communicate. Now, regarding Gaza and the West Bank and Palestine, it's a catastrophe, and it's a man-made catastrophe, exactly as Adina said. This is not the power of nature. This is something that can be stopped. If we want it, it would stop today. A ceasefire is possible today, right? Humanitarian, as people will tell you later, is possible. I do think that we need to think about it a little bit, as everybody here has said. It's not only stopping the war, it's not only providing humanitarian yet, it is rebuilding the area, rebuilding a region in a way that allows people to regain their peace. As a pulmonologist, again, I'm thinking about very simple. All the kids, Gaza is the place with the youngest population in the world. In most wars, when there is bombings, you run away. Here we have a population that is staying within the blast of the building. So from my point of view, you have kids exposed to dust, asbestos. These are 50s buildings, lead, everything. This could cripple a nation if we don't act very soon. So in some ways, maybe all of us can act together to change this. But we have to think about it not only as a humanitarian issue, not only as a political issue, but as a human topic, which is we respect the people that live there. We all sort of enroll to end this situation. Yeah, never again is for everybody, not just for Jews.
Thank you, Naftali. So we'll keep the questions to after the second part in order to give you a break, but we'll end this panel with a quote. I'm going to use Prophet Muhammad's quote, and I think we have a similar quote in probably every culture. He said, "Whoever among you sees a wrong, let him change it with his hand," which means by action. If we can do an action that can make the lives of Palestinians better, we should do that. If he cannot do so, then with his tongue, by speaking up. If he cannot do so, then with his heart, by condemning it. Is the weakest level of faith. So I hope that this panel discussion is starting a learning experience and maybe a call for action, definite call for action, in order to make the lives of Palestinians better. Thank you. We'll give you a break and we'll get back at 2 o'clock exactly. Thank you. There is refreshment and coffee outside for you.
Yes, sure.
So worried. Well, I mean, really?
It's very. I hope you're not part of it.
Hello, everyone. We're going to start in a couple minutes. If you could please take your seats. There will be more time to speak with our panelists and speakers after the second of the event. Thank you.
I'm not impressive enough.
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank everyone who's bearing with us and staying here on this long afternoon. I will introduce myself. I'm Akiva Leibowitz. I was raised in Beersheba, Israel. That's in the southern part of Israel, in the Negev, in Nakab. There happen to be a fair amount of people who come from that region. And I've been practicing as an anesthesiologist and intensivist at BI Medical Center, Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, just across the street for the past 10 years. As someone who has grown up and been trained and went to med school and has been trained in Beersheba, which is a mere 40-minute drive away from Gaza City, I could not remain silent and complicit with the bloodshed going on so close to where I spent such an important part of my life. So for this next session, I will invite Brian Rooster, who's a pediatric resident here at Boston Children's Hospital, who has been working night and day and night, in between shifts, and his clinical commitments to make this, with Noor and other students, make this meeting possible. I will invite Ryan to introduce our next speaker, and we'll then have our next panel.
You need the mic. Okay, it's already on. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ryan Brewster. I'm a resident physician in pediatrics at Boston Children's and Boston Medical Center as part of the Leadership in Equity and Advocacy and Global Health Pathways. It's really been a great honor to be part of the planning committee as someone who is neither Palestinian nor Israeli, as an all-American, in Dr. Ansari's words. Highlighting that as physicians, we are categorically, morally, professionally obligated to the welfare of children and people all around the world. for that reason, I'm greatly looking forward to the second portion of today's event now and looking forward. As we've discussed, the ongoing war has stoked an already dire humanitarian in Gaza. Solutions must address the most immediate and evolving threats to human health and security while serving a bolder vision for longer-term development. Our panel will feature renowned and international experts in various fields who will share their experiences on the ground, in the wards of the hospital, and in the halls of government. Our keynote speaker, Dr. Ghassan Abu Sitta, is unable to join us. So I think we'll just move unless there's been a change. We'll pass along to Dr. Leibowitz, who will be moderating the panel. Thank you.
So I'll introduce our panelists for this afternoon. So the first panelist, Dr. Abouleish, has been introduced, and we're happy to have him back on stage. Next to him is Dr. Aboud Okal. Aboud is a Palestinian-American who grew up in Gaza, received his PhD from the University of Utah, and did postdoctoral training at UCSF Cancer Immunology, and is currently a director of translational research actively working on late-stage clinical development of cell therapies in industry setting. Ask yourselves, then why is he sitting here? Well, we'll hear extensively from Aboud, but Aboud and his wife, Wafa, and their son, Yusuf, who is, were recently in Gaza on a 2-week trip in late September when the events of October 7th started. So we will hear from him. Dr. David Hassan is a Palestinian-American neurosurgeon, professor and co-director of the Duke Comprehensive Stroke Center at Duke University. He's an international authority in cerebrovascular research with over 270 peer-reviewed publications, multiple NIH grants, and a member of several editorial boards with high-impact medical journals. Dr. Hassan spent a week in Gaza in late December as part of the Rahma medical aid team after the United Nations passed a resolution calling to open the ports for aid. He maintained a written and photo diary which has been shared on various networks and has been a strong advocate since for immediate ceasefire and medical humanitarian support to be followed by reconstructing the health system in Gaza. Dr. Guy Shalev is the Executive Director of Physicians for Human Rights Israel and a research fellow at the Minerva Center for the Rule of Law under Extreme Conditions. He is a medical and political anthropologist specializing in the intersection of medical professionalism, ethno-national politics, and the bioethics of Israel-Palestine. Guy received his PhD from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and his publications have appeared in the American Anthropologist, Israeli Sociology, and Culture, Medicine, and the Psychiatry. If you look well enough in the literature, you can see one paper which Dr. Shalev actually discusses Dr. Abouleish presentations, and it's available for download. Physicians employs a multifaceted approach to achieve its goals through the provision of humanitarian aid and work to promote policy change. Physicians for Human Rights works to change discriminatory and abusive structures and policies towards Palestinians in the occupied territories, prisoners and detainees, migrant workers, refugees, undocumented persons, and Israeli residents. It stands at the forefront of the struggle for human rights, health in particular, in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories, and works to promote a just society where the right to health is granted equally to all people under Israel responsibility. So with that introduction, I will pass the microphone on to our panelists. So Dr. Aboud, many here may be curious what brings a researcher in industry to be here with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to start off by saying thank you to the planning committee and really a big shout out to Noor for helping put this together and really as well also the gratitude I have to see this auditorium and attendance taking time out of your time to attend today. I think by virtue of introduction, I consider myself as part of the broader healthcare system. My parents, like many Palestinian parents, wanted me to go to medical school. I struck a deal with them that I'll still try to help patients, but not by being in the clinic every day. No offense, doctors. I did that. I pursued the research path, and that's why part of why I wanted to do industry actually is because I wanted to be as close as possible to bringing new medicines to patients. So that's personally from a professional level, but perhaps the more relevant is here is this aspect of us being there in the right place at the right time. I would say that turned out to be wrong time, but there is no wrong time. That is where I am from. I grew up in Palestine for what I consider most critical years of my life. Ages 10 to 20. Both my parents are Palestinian American from Gaza, and I want to further edit that statement actually, as they're not from Gaza. They're also from Brer, a village that actually is pretty close to your hometown, Akiva, in 1948. So they were displaced already. My grandparents were displaced already to Gaza, and yet there is this continuation of the displacement. And I think one thing that resonates with me from the prior conversation around the never again. When we were in Gaza on October 7, waking up that morning and not realizing what was happening, and then eventually as events unfolded, and on October 13, when the Israeli army announced everyone who wants to stay safe, they should head down south, and without any further directions, and having our toddler son with us, and we decided to leave Gaza actually. My parents' home and where I grew up is Jabalia camp actually, again, a refugee camp. This is how Gaza was set up. There weren't that many Gazans before the actual residents of Gaza until it was a major metro city, but back in the day, but majority of people in Gaza are actually refugees. And I do remember that drive down on October 13 when we were rushing, scrambling to go down to south. And I'm so glad we did, because the house we were staying in, my parents' house and my wife's parents' house, are both flattened to the ground. We don't know. What we know based on the destruction is that it's heavy fighter jets bombardment that flattens such structures to the ground. So I'm glad that we went down south. It took a lot of argument when my dad specifically and my mom that morning in what we thought was critical hours, because again we did not know. All we knew, we had to head south of Gaza Valley, and what resonates with me from these arguments is exactly what my parents were saying, is that this is a deja vu. This is the ongoing Palestinian deja vu. This is exactly what they heard in 1948. This is again what they heard in 1967. This is every single time people that leave never come back, not by choice. They're never allowed to come back. So regardless, we head down south, and I'll wrap up here. I could talk forever. Apologies. But I think we drove down that day in separate cars, my wife and I, my wife being with her family. And again, the situations that you're put in Gaza are unimaginable. You're never prepared. Maybe doctors, trauma doctors, are prepared for anything that comes their way. But I think an average south, and my wife, when we finally reunited in Rafah, the furthest southern city that you could get to in Gaza, the second I saw her, of course, she melted down, cried, that we were united. And she said, now I know what 1948 felt, because literally this is living it again. You have masses of people that are, this is why it's called forced displacement. No one wants to leave home, right? They're forced to, whether it's to save their child, to save their lives, and everyone has their own perspective. But in terms of priorities, my parents are right now they consider themselves near the end of their lives, and they think that, it's they wouldn't want to go down outside of Gaza. So I think they're cuckoo about that because it's really putting your life in danger. I fully respect that decision. But maybe one or two things I wanted to share as well that I haven't actually shared before, because being there, you see the things you see and your priorities are all over the place. But I don't think there's enough description, advocacy, raising awareness that would do what's happening in Gaza right now justice. I think we very often look at the big picture, but there's so much catastrophe in the details. We spoke in the previous panel, I think, about schools. Those schools that remain standing in Gaza, throughout Gaza Strip right now, I guarantee you that the day after the war stops, none of those families are going to have homes to go back to. So where do kids go to schools? That was one reason why my brother recently left Gaza, because of his twin daughters, 8 years old, that he could not justify it any longer and prioritize their safety. So he had to escape with bitterness of leaving Gaza. And in that regard, I think we see the numbers, the death, the injured. I grew up in Gaza where it used to be good old days of Gaza. Our experience in Gaza recently, when we were there for the first 27 days of war, where when I look back at now, nothing compared to what's happening right now. I remember us running out of milk for my toddler. And I remember lying to him, my wife and I, and we diluted down milk until we ran out. And then he'd go to sleep. He's, taking his bottle. So we replaced that with water, regardless. That was a big concern. Aside from surviving, aside from living, aside not from dying, next on your priority is food. My dad is 70 years old with several chronic diseases, hypertension, cardiac disease, diabetes. And he's a thank you. My dad is a doomsday prepper. In case you have not heard that. So he has a lot of medication, always, wherever. And he's probably your favorite if you're his treating physician, because he's the most compliant patient about his medication. He takes it religiously. So, and in conversations with him in the past few weeks, he's running low on his supplies. Again, a 70 years old man that no longer, when we were in Gaza up until November 2nd, you could at least go and hit a few pharmacies or a few shops and you could find supplies. You could not find supplies. Over the past couple of months, there is no pharmacies. There are no stores you could go buy from. Your only source of usually the aid. And the aid is inconsistent and the aid is not the best it can be. And this is a reminder that for those that may not know, Gaza has always been deliberately meant to be dependent on external resources. We talk about sustainability in every single aspect of our life nowadays. Yet when it comes to Gaza, every solution throughout the history that's been put in place, and broader Palestine as well, because the West Bank is not off the hook. West Bank is actually many think that is the future of the West Bank is heading, if things remain the way they are, is heading to the direction where Gaza is right now. My last point that I wanted to share around my parents not having their medication is that is still not high on their priority list. That's how messed up things are over there. That food comes on top of medicine. And my last thing is, and this haunts me because I have sisters also that have kids. And my sister was trying to reach her daughter, that she's divorced, custody with the dad, and regardless, different shelters. And my sister spent 8 days trying to reach her daughter, could not connect with her. Spent days trying to call her from here because it's easier. If you're in Gaza and you're trying to call someone in Gaza, you have pressure on both ends of the line. If you're outside of Gaza, at least there's only pressure on the network from the receiver side. I did get a hold of my niece, Zaina. It's a couple of weeks now, and haven't been able to afterwards. And I chatted with her, how are you doing, et cetera, et cetera. And I asked her, she's 12 years old. She had type 1 diabetes since she was 6 years old. And she's managed early age to, take care of herself, testing her levels and dosing herself. She always travels with her pen. I asked her, how are you doing? And she said, I'm doing well. And I was scared to ask her about her insulin pen situation. Yet I did. And she said, I'm down to 2 pens. But I'm not worried about it, is what she said. And I said, great. And she said, because my dad is visiting from Egypt, and he's going to bring me more pens. And I know that's bullshit. Dr. Hassan knows that no one goes into Gaza nowadays unless under extremely restrictive circumstances. And it just took me back to the moments where we ran out of milk for Yusuf, and putting yourself as a parent, there's no way life can prepare you for such situation. And the reason I say this is that, again, remember, those numbers are not numbers. Those are stories, those are people, those are lives, those are human beings. And the level of catastrophe that's happening in Gaza right now extends beyond what we think is hospitals, etc. Hospitals are important, obviously. I just want to mention one last thing. I promise I'll shut up for the rest of the day. I grew up in Tel Zatar. Dr. Abul Aish knows it very well because it's part of Jabalia camp and it's super tiny. But where there are 2 major hospitals in northern Gaza, Al Auda Hospital and Indonesian Hospital. I saw footage of the area maybe 2 weeks ago or so when the Israeli ground invasion kind of retracted back from northern Gaza. It's unrecognizable. Hospitals, both hospitals have been decommissioned that in a bit, but I couldn't recognize the neighborhood that I grew up in. These hospitals are walking distance, hundreds of feet away from my home. Initially, I thought, this might be a strategic location for the IDF that they need to clean up the area. No, another 3rd hospital that's further down in Jabalia camp was also taken at Kamal Udwan Hospital in Beit Lahia. I've heard through contacts or friends that remain there that in northern Gaza that anytime a clinic is meant to be set up, a makeshift clinic to provide first aid is often targeted in northern Gaza. So it is deliberate what's happening. The attack on the healthcare, I think, is not to be underestimated. And I really want to thank everyone for being here because it means a lot. Apologies.
You mentioned that the current form or situation in Gaza is meant to keep Gaza dependent, and a common thread along your touching story is numerous professionals and highly trained individuals who are more privileged and are able to, seek of better personal standing for them and their families, which is natural and understandable. I wonder, and I'm wondering out loud, maybe the panelists will be able to speak to that later, whether that is part of the design of keeping Gaza dependent. And I'm asking that not only in the sense of understanding the past or the present, but also what can be done to rebuild with the professionals and the knowledge to remove that dependency in the future. And I think that's part of what we're going to be talking here within the panel. So thank you. So I'll move on to Dr. David Hassan, whose origins trace back to the village of Tubas. And I learned over lunch that it took an Israeli border patrol soldier to discover that he is actually a Palestinian citizen. So in that, I thought it was a story that encapsulates much of the essence. But maybe you can tell us about the journey that brought you from a very established role in neurosurgery at Duke to working basically with your background in Gaza amongst this carnage that is ongoing.
Thank you. I want to first thank Dr. Ansari and the rest of the team and giving me an opportunity to echo the voices of the people from Gaza. And hopefully I'll, within 4 or 5 minutes, try to have you mirror what I saw through my journey of 7 days. I try to be very concise, and I have a power presentation. I hope Dr. Ansari will let me share with it, because at the end of this, because words are nothing like images and pictures of I took personally during that time. First of all, I was very self-centered, and all my career I spent it trying to build a reputation. And I have forms now. I have name it to there's my reputation in cerebrovascular is just second to none in the world, and I host a lot of international meetings. But I never really hit me so hard. I was in Kuwait when the Iraqi invasion happened, and I saw that. I was part of the helping in the establishment to get food from Baghdad, and I was one of the last people to leave in the last 3 planes with the French consulate. So this is not a new, but it never hit me so much till they see the media and the social media reflecting on what's going on in Gaza. And it's just a nightmare every day. I couldn't function, be honest with you, as functional as I am. I sleep 3-4 hours. And this just haunts me all the time. And my wife, who's a cancer survivor, just survived the cancer. We're all a trauma surgeon, very accomplished. We're all determined that we're going to take my daughter. The war is finished, and we're going to go volunteer. But it never came to our mind that during this active war that I go, because the condition, they don't allow anyone to enter October 7. And needless to say, you're not guaranteed safety, because we hear about UN physicians, journalists killed and murdered, whether directly or indirectly. That's a different topic. So when 2070 was passed by the UN, within 48 to 72 hours, a group was assembled, and we dropped everything that I have. Literally, I went to the chair and said, I'm leaving. Whether you like it or not, I'm gone. And and again, what goes, as the dean said, the kids teach us the most. And then just, if we listen to our kids, I think there will be no wars or anything. So the whole time I was, during that time, think of is how can I leave? And if something happened to me, how can, die? My daughter, how she can grow. She's always going to be, that's my perception, that she's going to grow without a dad and everything. So that haunted me. And so within 4 hours, we're trying to pack everything. My wife never said a single thing, packing my with distilled bottle that you put water in it to get it distilled, power bars because she knows the food. And then we went to Target. We're doing all these things. And my daughter just disappeared. And I thought she just mad and angry. We had almost 48 hours with a big bag, 2 bags actually, of stuffy toys and lollipops. And she handed it to me, and actually she made me take all the power bars out. She didn't care if I starved or not. All she cared about is those need to be, because we entered on Christmas Day, and she wanted toys and lollipops. Once I heard that from her and everything, I was so emboldened I did not think about, you don't think anymore. Here's a kid that's teaching you a lesson. And so we went and we arrived at Egypt, which is a nightmare, and going from Cairo to Rafah. It took us a day and a half, if you will. First day was 11 checkpoints, and every time we have to reproduce our passports, and we have to call the UN and WHO. So it was a nightmare, but we were all determined. However, when we got about, this is one of the points that are just really dear to my heart, and as a dean and all those guys, literally, and I have a video to show you with the Egyptian music going on because my driver was playing it. At least 10 miles of 4 lanes of 18-wheelers full of supply cannot enter Gaza. And I made the driver stop, and we kind of conversed with several people. And some has been on the border for a week or 2 weeks that cannot enter the borders because of that. And because, and keep in mind, like before October 7, there was about 500 trucks entering Gaza, aid and Rawa and everything. Now, if they're lucky, 200 a day. If they're lucky, most of the time. So imagine it's not even with all the devastation and destruction that is ongoing. Finally, we entered the crossing, and as soon as opened the gates, a lot of people displaced to Rafah, and you could see they're now becoming almost lawless because there's no food, starvation. And level 5, which is disaster, catastrophe, about 400,000, that's from the food. They level the catastrophe and the problem for food shortage in countries. And level 5 is the highest, which is catastrophe, is about 400,000. And level 4, which is emergency, about 1 million. So when they opened the gate, there's just kids like a magnet kick, striking the iron. They just came running because they think it's food. They haven't seen food. And I have witnessed, and there's like they're killing a donkey so they can eat. And that's how I witnessed it myself as it was traveling back between European and Nasser. But as soon as they saw it's just minivans and the ambulance, just to see the disappointment, the despair in their eyes, and just going to back where they were. As we drove to European hospital, 60 to 7% complete destruction, carpet mopping. It was not a term, and I never understood it. I read it, but till I saw it in my eyes, this is like, again, I'm reflecting, I'm trying to mirror what's happened. 60 to 70% of the building just gone, catastrophe, non-functional, including schools. And so we got very close to the hospital just to kind of, I would address a few points. We got to the hospital, and hospitals became now refugee camps, where a small hospital, 250 beds, is hosting 50,000 people, and 10,000 almost living inside the hospital and 40 as outside. So it's just, and these people over there, they're talking about open sewage and everything. The hospital, there's trash, mountains of trash next to water storage, which is a disaster because that's where infectious disease could happen, and it's already happening. It's already gone, and then we can talk about it a little bit longer. Later. I'm sorry. So we did that. We entered the hospital, and we saw the hospital capacity 250, but they have 1,200 patients. Almost more than half are right on the outside the hospital, either laying on a mattress or a bed or even sometimes on just a blanket, amputated, fresh amputations. And you could see, and you walk there and you could smell the Pseudomonas coming out of their legs and other legs and things. So there was, to kind of represent to you how much is missing. So we got inside. People are living inside. So everybody put a little carton, and I would love to show you the pictures to kind of reflect that. And then people are cooking in the bathroom, where like the toilet are flooding back the sewage because there's no water. And this hospital is not meant for 50,000 additional to the patient. Is taking care of that amount. So just the sanitation part of that, in addition to the famine, which is huge, which I'll talk to you about the different diseases. We started operating, I operated the first night, but what first thing that struck me and everything, the shortage of medical supplies. We have none. And toward the end, we had patient being really amputated or going through surgeries and things like without anesthetics or opiates. People are burned and their dressing being peeled off and changed without any anesthetics or opiates. The pain of these patients as they been going through these surgeries and the different. So that's itself a magnitude. The amount and the number of patients being operated on. At one point, I have to operate on 2 patients simultaneously in one room, and we didn't have water. I had to use my bottled water to wash my hands to kind of do the surgeries, and that's what just amplify the lack of medical supplies. Now the function. So let's talk more. The Israelis divided Gaza to 4 areas, and they also gave them a numbers. That's because they want people to move from area to area: northern Gaza, middle Gaza, southern Gaza, and Rafah. In northern Gaza, there's about 450,000 people at this point. That's an estimation, because they cannot move through the cross points. No one can move across the points. Even some UN and WHO. These people up north have zero access to food, supplies, water, and most of, to me in healthcare, they have no hospitals, no clinics. That's in northern Gaza, and you could see there here. And I'm happy, if I may, move the slides quickly. As you see here, it's this is back in November, and you could see the areas divided. And as of November, just only 2?
3.
Okay. But just to kind of supply, I'm not going to show this, and we'll show it later because I was put on time frame. And that's okay, because that's it. What really, beside the safety, healthcare providers, there's so many of them under severe stress, no food, no money, but the safety. Some of them would come in for a day and then leave the next day, and when they go home, I've seen it, witnessed it, friends of mine, they go home and their families under the rubble. So the safety is missing. But what I want to emphasize to you is it's more than just the trauma. There's a perfect storm of diseases. You have the trauma, which is, as sad as it is, as devastating as 25,000 people. Then you have the non-communicable diseases, which is hypertension, COPD, MI. If someone comes in an MI, no one will look at them because the system is so fatigued that it only takes for trauma, if you're lucky. And the dialysis units aren't going. Pregnant women, 50,000, have no access to care. Infants have no access to incubators. And I can go on and on and on. If you put them in one pocket, is about 350,000 estimated. The biggest thing, which I call the tsunami, is infectious disease. The flu, COVID, it's already hepatitis A. That's when I left, there was about 180,000 of flu and COVID. There's about 80,000 with diarrhea and hepatitis A. And I can go in, if this happened, if this is a little bit that we hear about the wildfires in everywhere, it takes only a spark. Once that spark started, it is over. The system, only there's functioning 4 hospitals now in entire Gaza after they raided Al-Khair and Amal and also now Nasser. So there's nothing there to kind of sustain the system. It is collapsing in front of my eyes when over there. So these are some of the things that my slides will show, but to respect the time, I'll stop here and happy to discuss and show my slides again.
Thank you, David. I'll move on to Dr. Guy Shalev. As I mentioned earlier, the mission of Physicians for Human Rights Israel is striving for the right of health for anyone subjugate to the powers or to the governance of Israel. As such, it put you and your organization in a unique position that you have been providing and working on medical access to Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza prior to October 7th. You've been first to respond to medical needs of Israelis affected by the October 7th attacks, and you were since then active in various different realms after every single day in the past 3 months after October 7th, dealing with a dire situation on the ground. So we'd like to hear about your experiences as a leader of an organization which sits as this crucial and very unique position.
Thank you, and thank you all for coming today. It's very hard listening to my friends here telling their stories of their personal experiences. For us at PHRI, Physicians for Human Rights Israel, we are based in Tel Aviv, and we advocate for the right of health of everyone between the river and the sea, as Akiva said. And we felt like everything, like if we are talking about sewage, all the sewage in the region is really coming up, and we had to do some urgent actions in very different spheres. I would just say very quickly about all the non-Gaza related effects of this attack, of this war that we are now seeing. So like Akiva said, evacuees from Kibbutz Be'eri, from the kibbutzim that were attacked in the October 7th, they were evacuated to places where no medical service was available, and we had to open a mobile clinic there and provide urgent services for them. Prisoners, particularly Palestinian prisoners in the Israeli prison service, were put under emergency regulations, and their rights were violated very severely. 7 prisoners have died in Israeli custody since October 7. In the West Bank, settlers' violence and the military violence against communities in the West Bank became ever more aggressive. Just one example, we have a project with small communities in the northern east side of the West Bank with 13 communities of like herding communities of Palestinians. All of them got displaced. It's a total ethnic cleansing of this area. And I really suggest that if you're not well informed about what's happening in the West Bank, on the shadow of this crisis in Gaza, it's very important that we all also look at that direction to see what's going on. And of course, Gaza. We've been working in Gaza since the foundation of the organization 35 years ago, but I would say most intensively since the starting of the Israeli blockade in 2007. We have monthly delegations going into Gaza, performing operations, doing mental health trainings. We focus a lot on trainings. The idea is that we believe in the Gazan healthcare professionals and system, and there's a good reason for that. They're very skilled, and the idea is to help train and support their skills. It's important to understand that under the Israeli blockade, they cannot leave the Gaza Strip for conferences, fellowships, trainings, anything that's so vital to any health professionals, as you all know. And we have been working very hard on the movement of patients outside of Gaza because of the blockade. Medical treatments that are not available in Gaza, then patients need to leave Gaza to hospitals in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, but Israel denies their ability to move. 40% of patients who need treatment get denied. I'm talking about before October 7th. And that's also very important because we are now very focused on this crisis. And some of us are hearing all this talk about the day after. The day after cannot be what was the day before, right? And we're working on medical apartheid, and that's very visible when you talk about Gaza. So you see that health outcomes, for example, 7 times the number of children dying in Gaza than in Israel, for example, 10 years gap in life expectancy between Israel and Gaza. These are outcomes that you cannot not see the apartheid in them. And of course, social determinants of health, that the conditions, the public health conditions and education, infrastructure, everything in Gaza that leads to lower health outcomes in the Gazan population. And so it is important, and my colleagues here, the attack on healthcare in Gaza. This is not a kind of side effect of the attack of the Israeli attack on Gaza, and it's not new. The Goldstone report after the 2008-9 aggression against Gaza was very clear about Israeli violations of and committing of war crimes against. Later in 2014, again, dozens and dozens of direct attack of health professionals, ambulances, and health units across Gaza. And this has been a very consistent strategy by Israel. And of course, in this recent crisis, the amount and the scale of the attack on the Gazan healthcare system is really unfathomable. And we need to understand that in terms of the damage that is done to the system, to the health system, but also it is a very, it's a blow to Gazan community, to Gazan society. The Gazan healthcare system is maybe one of the only public systems that Gazans believe in, trust in. They consider the Gazan healthcare system as a place where they can care for each other, where they're born, where they're sick, they can go and get attended. And really ruining to the ground this healthcare system, go to the Gazan society as a society. If we're thinking about what Abud talked about, forced displacement, and then what makes a forced displacement into ethnic cleansing is that people cannot go back or not allowed to go back. And then when there's no healthcare system in the whole northern side of Gaza, for example, people cannot go back. Of course, when 70% of houses are damaged, people cannot go back. So this is part of a very infrastructural violence on the Gazan society. And it's also important to look at the kind of discourse around these attacks on Gaza healthcare. Israel has been very vocal about the reasons why it is acceptable for them to attack hospitals and to attack healthcare professionals, providing all these kind of infographics and videos, and as if there's the Hamas headquarters are inside each and every hospital. And then when you see the evidence, it's just not there. It's not corroborated by any third party, not journalists, not international organizations. And then you're left with just asking why. Why putting 30 hospitals out of order? Why ruining, like Abud talked about hospitals in his childhood neighborhood, why ruining them in a way that it's not even possible to imagine them going back to becoming operative and serving the Gazan population? Then the other thing I would want to say is about thinking about how we rebuild this system, how we rebuild Gazan society. And Ilana talked about it in the previous panel about the isolation of Gaza. And it is important that we keep the eye on Gaza as part of Palestine and keep the eye on the Gazan healthcare system as part of the Palestinian healthcare system. This is how it was built. This was the logic behind building the Palestinian healthcare system. Some of the treatments are available in the West Bank, some are available in Gaza, because the idea was that these are connected and patients can move and can get treatment in different areas of Palestine. So this needs to be always in front of our eyes when we think about how we rebuild this system. Maybe the last thing I would say is I'm very happy to be here. I came all the way from Tel Aviv just for this panel with a 15-year. Wait until you hear this. I have a 15-day-old baby back home. So at least I can sleep while I do it.
The guy was not supposed to be here, but after getting the invitation, they thought in the organization that this is important enough to spread the word to make this newly made father
and the reason is because it is important that we also look at the medical community, the worldwide medical community, as a source of hope, as a political power. Doctors in Israel look at Harvard Medical School as like, this is the center of the world. It's important for them to be accepted. It's important for their journal articles to be accepted, where people here in this room judge their journal articles, where they invite them to conferences. This is kind of the weak, I guess, the weak kind of point of Israeli society. They want to be accepted by by the international community. And if we get the international medical community to put pressure on the Israeli medical community, if we get them to understand that they cannot just keep silent while their colleagues in the Gazan healthcare system are being bombed, and they're their peers, they're their colleagues. So I hope some of you can help with that and put that pressure. It's not only, when we speak about political solutions and political pressure, it's not only talking to your senator or going to a demonstration. You need to think about different communities and how they can exert power in order to change. And the most important thing right now is just to bring a valid, viable ceasefire, and then thinking about how to have a future where everyone is free between the river and the sea, and everyone is their security is secured, and they can raise their children not thinking when the next insulin pen is coming, or when, or how to ration milk, and that's I hope that's something we can help bring about.
Like to show the slide?
Yeah, it takes about 5 minutes, and I'll take you in and again, I warn you, if you there will be some graphic, really graphic, so if you cannot stomach it, there's a time to kind of leave now.
You're in the medical school.
Don't leave, there's still another battle, so just
but come back. No.
Turn your eyes out.
Close that. So this is a presentation, as I told you, it was like, this is from November. It shows that about, as of today, only 4 out of 35 hospitals are functioning. They're all in the south, Nasser, European Hospital, and Najjar, which was a drone attack, and also the field hospitals. And it also shows you that here about 50,000 women are pregnant, and they have zero care. About 183 need incubators. And
everything. But this is this, you can access this, please. I mean, you can always go that. This is the OSHA, and it has a summary in a daily basis of what's going on, and over there, and it shows here. This is from January. Highlights how many casualties on both sides, if you will, but also summarizes what the OSHA, the UN, and WHO see it as but it tells you here like how many people are starving at level 5, about almost 400. Level 4 is about 1 million. It tells you how many people need dialysis at that time, cancer patients. So it's just accessible. I'm just making it available for you guys here. This is where I would like to spend time about what really is becoming my passion personally. I have a lot of people here around me that they talk about, the next step, the peace and everything. I took it on my mission, and across the bear is the healthcare, survive, find a way to survive. I know it doesn't solve a lot of problems, but if I can focus on this and help it. But these are the ingredients is are going to make the system recover or collapse completely. And they talk about bed capacity. There's only now what used to be about only 1/10 of what bed capacity is available because all of these hospitals got destructed. Functioning hospital, we talked about it. We talked about safety for healthcare providers. UN doesn't send any people inside because of the fear. They already lost so many people there, and they cannot move any trucks. And with the 6th attempt to deliver the largest convoy of food, medication to northern Gaza failed because Israel will not guarantee safety on. So there have been many attempts for that. The food, we talked about it, sanitation, the fuel to run the hospitals. There's again, the electricity is, if you can't have it, you can't run any ICU, you cannot run anesthesia, you cannot run anything. And this is where I'll call it not the tornado, the hurricane. This is the level 5 hurricane. We're talking about the trauma, the non-communicable diseases, the communicable diseases, and on top of that, they're enabled by the sanitation, the problem with sanitation and the famine. We talked about it. This is what caused the system is already collapsed. There's, again, I cannot emphasize that to you. These are some of the things, the most vulnerable people here, the infants, there's no survivor. If they have any issues, they need a care because, again, the hospitals now, only 4 functioning hospitals, and they're all geared and full, but just trauma patients. And most of the surgeons now that are living in Rafah because Khan Yunis is being sieged completely, Nasser is being sieged, and I suspect in the next few days, and maybe entered by the Israeli troops. The only one left is the European. Children, as you see here, just horrible spread of communicable diseases, PTSDs. Lice. These kids have not had a bath for 90 days. Lice is just coming out of their hair everywhere. Women, over 300% increase of miscarriages out of 50,000. No C-sections, period. Either you make it or you die. There's no one else to kind of help you with that. No post-delivery care. No simple supplies for women. Hygiene. It's just, I mean, I can go on. Women had all injured and they're all just taking care of the injured ones. Elderly. How you can move an elder person from one place to another. Inability to move them. Sometimes they're left and because of the choice of the family. Disabled. Amputated. How are you going to move? There's nothing. No cars. Cars running, some of them on cooked oil, and literally cooked oil. And the donkeys, as I said, told you about, and the psychiatric patients are no medications. This is a solution, but I want to go forward here. But this is what I did. I took with me, because there's no supplies whatsoever, I packed all the OR with me and I took it with me. And here, this is a picture of the trip. There's a video, but you could see how... Yeah, trucks. Can you play the video? Yeah. You can see here the trucks. This is my Egyptian driver playing the music. But you can see just, and you can see in a little bit on the other side. This is almost 10 miles. 10 miles of you can see on the other side of truck supplies. Look at that. Cannot enter and has food and spoiled. I was telling the group we had Palestinian food at Jeddah. By the time they got to us, it was very spoiled. This is when we entered the Gaza. Hospital is a refugee camp. This is when you enter the hospital. This is a camp now, refugee camp. Look at these people living outside. It's cold over there, and they have no access to anything else but these plastics. And while I'm there, I told you, when they were bombarded on a nightly basis, literally every 5 minutes. At one point, we thought we were going to lose it because they dropped a 2,000-pound bomb next to the hospital. This is how they live around the hospital. This is where they converted the cooking bread, This is the trash that is going to be a disaster. Look, it's very close to the water, which is a source of contamination. This is inside the hospital. People living inside the hospital. You see that curtains, if you will, living in there. This is their, and people don't move. This is here. They're cooking food within the hospital because there's no else, and just spreading the bread. This is in the bathroom because there's no cooking food, and just this is because there has nothing. This is here the flies. This is the bathrooms. This is clean. This is clean. They cleaned it just, it's accessible. And this is the injuries, as simple as this is kids. This is a personal, these are, I personally took care of them. And let me go back here. This is the kid I was talking to, and I was going to take him to the OR, but because there are not enough rooms, he ruptured his carotid and bled through the eye like a fountain from when he died. I lost him. He was talking to. This is the kid that I named him Jacob because he came in alone. All his family, 37 people, were killed, and he was only by himself. I named him Jacob because no one else can mourn for him. I held him so close to my heart and prayed for him and did my prayers, and I called him Jacob. This is another kid who's talking about pieces. I couldn't show the picture because I couldn't stomach it. It's different parts. I had to put them in a bag. This is different kids. This is nothing. This is one day that came in that I was in the ED. I'm talking about, oh, sorry. non-communicable disease. This is a 16-year-old that because of no access to health, she has sarcoma. And look, within a few months, look what happened. We had to amputate it. And the only way she will survive is she leaves Gaza and get chemo and radiation. This is us. This is a 2-patient operating on that day. This is me, but I'm going to move faster. This is where you have supplies missing. So look, this is guy. They don't have scalpels or anything. Use this. You keep it in your pocket because you're not going to have access to another scalpel. This is the maggot. You can see the maggots are growing. This is on a daily basis. All these patients are going through a successful surgeries, but they all die after because infection and problem. This is what we received the last couple of days about warning that the European hospital surrounding is going to be bombed and leave. This is one of my colleagues who was a healthcare provider, went home, and all his family. This is a 13-year-old that featured in CNN story that she bombarded, her family killed. She was the only survivor. She had an amputated leg. They moved her from Al-Shifa to a Nasser hospital. And one, she happened sleeping, a dumb bomb, which is about 47% of all the the bombs are dumb bombs, which is, just thrown without, she fell on top of her head while she was in a hospital and killed her. And that was featured in CNN. So this is some of the pictures. I'm sorry I went fast, but images is everything. We can speak all day, but these images can speak loudly.
Many of you mentioned towns such as Deir, Oud, Fallujah. If you open a map, any standard map these days, you will find none of those. They do not appear there. When our kids were younger, we went on a trip with their unique school to visit the remnants of the town of Simpson, which is adjacent to those towns of Deir and Oud. And what we saw were the mere ruins of what used to be thriving towns and villages. So we got together this afternoon to see what can be done to prevent Gaza, Beit Hanun, Rafah from becoming these kinds of distant memories. So with that, I will Mali and the rest of the panel to come up, and we will hear from the rest of the panel how they envision or how we can support Palestinians who have a vision, how they would envision their future.
Thank you very much. Everybody has a connection simply by being present in society. Seeing the pictures that David just showed us, I think, is one of the most difficult things that any of us can see. My connection to this comes from being the product of a Egyptian Syrian father and a Russian mother, who were both journalists and political activists working for liberation movements in the 1950s and 60s and subsequently, including Algerian liberation movements, African former colonial countries of Portugal or Spain and France. And in that context, I was sort of struck when I was growing up that many of these countries that successfully reached liberation, independence, were post-colonial, really ended up being still damaged by what had happened. And I think a lot of what we're seeing today, unfortunately, resonates with that. For me, the solution was to get out of that world, I thought, and focus my interest in medicine and science and try to do, like many of us, a little bit of good in the face of what we're seeing and what we have seen over the years. For me, it was to work in infectious diseases, to work on vaccine development. But at the same time, it was also to try to focus in an area where there is some hope, medicine, science, the idea that we can potentially help the few or help the many through one of those venues. And so what we wanted to do today was not end this meeting with all these stories that you've heard today, the realities that we know, that I think are in some sense conducive to despair. I think many of us feel that way. I know for me, my family, it's catastrophic. And it's not something that with, because that's not why I think most of us, all of us have gone in some way in the health, in the provision of health, in the study of health, or trying to improve the health of people. It's because ultimately despair really is what we're trying to fight off, and hope is really what we're trying to lead to. And so what we're trying to do here today in this final session is to really try to say, well, what can we do given the realities that we've all read about, we've now seen in very difficult detail. We had a meeting earlier today with an important member of Congress, and that was the question that she asked us. She said, there are some things that are above her pay grade, but what practically could be done to try to improve the massive humanitarian crisis that we're seeing today? I think it is the humanitarian crisis of our lifetime, unfortunately. It's one that is going to resonate throughout our lives. We're going to be thinking about what each and every one of us did to try to solve this and improve this problem. And so I'm going to turn to the panel today and really maybe try to see if we can end this very important program that Iman and Akiva sort of organized so well, with a message that might lead to some hope for all of us. I might start with you, David, if it's okay. You spoke, I think, very eloquently about some measures that could be done by our government, for example, that could result in some positive change. So I'd welcome you to summarize that, if you will.
I'll take a couple of minutes because I would like to hear the rest of it. But again, my focus is completely on the healthcare and how to survive the healthcare. So being a very pragmatic and practical person who've done research and done this, you always do what can, the low-hanging fruits. And the low-hanging fruits, one, United Nations, U.S. helped pass the 2070, which is calls for massive aid. So need one is increase the efficiency of the crossing border. You have to kind of hammer Egypt and influence Israel to kind of pass that. Before the war, there was about 500 trucks entering. That was even with the good conditions, if you want to call it good conditions. But after the war, if you're lucky, you have 200 trucks going in. So that's number one. Number two is safety. You want to offer safety for all these healthcare providers and also the entering medical groups and also the convoys that are supposed to travel and travel food and medicine. So that's the second one. It's all doable. It's just, again, a little bit of pressure, not a lot to ask of Israel, United States ask Israel. That's why I said low-hanging fruit. The other thing is functioning hospital. There's nothing functioning hospital or no functioning hospital in northern Gaza. And people are trapped, again, because of the crossborder. They cannot cross. So you can change those things. It's just tangible. All you have to revitalize and allow the trucks to go to northern Gaza. And they will, and hopefully, people are MacGyvers, I call them. They improvise and they can survive. The biggest thing, and again, that was a little bit of things, I'm just, again, being focused on the healthcare, is building just outside Rafah, the Egyptian side, a large USA, NATO military field hospital, because if you do that, you can increase the capacity up to 10,000 beds, and it's easy to do it, and that will accommodate and take all the pressure. The logistic can be worked out. I promise you it can, and it's feasible, and I've seen it. It can, but that's it. And if you do that, that would allow a lot of you guys to travel if you wish to go to that part and help in the hospitals, because no one is going to cross. I personally would not recommend to any group now entering Gaza because it's not safe, and two, there's no sustained medical supplies. So that's the other thing, sustained medical supplies. And the next thing I want to talk is about flu. For the flu, we need antibiotics, vaccination for all these kids. We need a safe for all these women to go in there that's they're safe. They can go and prenatal care, deliver, and have incubators there. There's not. These numbers are not included. And just, more of anything, and we talked about it, is the food, because what really is good is the famine. And I told you from personal experience. But these are some solutions and not everything. I think there is hope. I really do. I think it can be materialized. And I think we hear from the news about potential 1-month ceasefire, and I'm hoping that will be a window to rescue things. The healthcare can be survived. I really believe it can be survived, but I need a little pressure from the U.S. And it's not asking the ceasefire, because ceasefire is a big ask. At this point, as Senator Warren said, it's above her pay grade, but which we needed to in the long term. But these are things that are small, tangible things that can be done and improved.
Thank you. And I wanted to just quickly turn maybe to you, Dr. Ahmed, about we all have been hoping for some sort of international pressure to lead precisely to the ceasefire that you just mentioned, David, which I think it's impossible to imagine this situation not improving in any way if we don't stop dropping bombs on people, and if we don't, exactly as you said, I think very appropriately, provide food, water, heat, electricity for people. What can you tell us based on your experience? I know you were a little bit sobered in your opinion of international law, but can you give us some sense of how that might affect some change?
I must confess, I'm hearing a lot of folks talking about feeling hopeful or trying to offer a sense of hope. I have not yet gotten to that point. I'm still filled with so much anger, resentment, disappointment, disillusionment. So that's currently where I am. And I think that extends in some ways to my sense of the international legal system. What I am hopeful about, I'm hopeful about the activism, the resistance of my students at Columbia, who have been absolutely incredible in pushing the institution. I teach at an institution that's located on stolen land from the indigenous Lenape people at a school of public health called the Mailman School of Public Health, named after a very wealthy white guy with no discernible connection to public health, in a building named after, former CEO of a big pharma company, in a classroom named after a bank involved in the 2008 financial crisis. And so these institutions, including Harvard, are deeply embedded in the colonial capitalist project. I'm afraid it's often not the faculty who are the advocates for change and revolution, it's students. And I take and draw inspiration from students. And so my message of hope is to continue resistance, to continue the fight, to continue channeling this anger that we feel, that we write that are currently unfolding.
Thank you. So Naftali, you've been in this area for a long time. I'm sure a lot of these ideas and these sort of realities that we're facing today are not new to you. So could you share your thoughts with us?
Well, I'm not young anymore. And when I reflect back, I say I probably should have been a war activist. Maybe there would have been peace by now. Right? But now, seriously, not being cute. I think one is we cannot let go of hope. That's the people who are suffering in Gaza don't deserve us giving up on them. And but what I'm worried is that our anger and frustration will in some way make our action ineffective. So I think our action has to become, and that's I'm going to politics, has to become political. Knowing that things don't really make a difference. But remember, politics also means creating alliances. Because even 20% of people that know something right don't make a difference. You need 30, 40, 50. So I think there has to be an insistence on making Palestinians, their voices visible, their plight visible. And I think there also has to be an insistence on going out of this room, right? Coming out of our comfort zone. We still have to be able to speak, especially with American politicians, and I've done it in my area, which is going to speak with a Republican congressman that suggested to remove limitations on asbestos. Right? These limitations were not removed, not necessarily because of our activity, but because of this network that slowed down the process. So we have to be able to think how this anger, this justice is translated into political power. And this means alliances with people you don't necessarily like. So I'll stop here because I have to run. I have a dinner at New Haven in 3 hours. I also want to say another thing personal, and hopefully you do the same. So for me, I admit, I don't know about others, I participate in these events because they do fill me up with hope. Again, I look at the room and I see the eyes of the people who feel that we can change. There's good people in the world. And these are people, some of you, especially the younger ones, you may be leading congressional committees or health policy for of companies, which I will never be. So by this, I really want to thank you all for being here, and I'll be whistling sadly all the way that I'm driving to New Haven with a little bit more hope. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Steve, I wanted just to take up on what Naftali said, and taking this out of the classroom, taking it out of a symposium. I think, as far as I can tell, the last 30 years of your life have been taking it out of the classroom. Can you maybe share with us some of your experiences, some of the successes that you have had in being able to extricate some kids that were in difficult situations and potentially give them a little bit more hope?
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to say thank you again to Iman and to Akiva and everybody for putting this together. I think it's been really helpful, and hopefully will give us a sense of hope and to inspire us to work in a positive way in the midst of this terrible crisis and genocide. To answer your question, the whole issue here is what are we going to do? Okay, we know that there's a genocide going on. We know that everything is falling apart. I can use some of my previous experiences on the ground in Palestine and tell you circumstances in which we brought kids out, changed their life, they've come back home, and they've done things which have indicated that their lives have been changed. And we also brought kids out, got them medical care. We had 2 boys who came out in 2018 after they were shot at the Great Return marches at the border of Gaza. They were shot by snipers half a mile away. Had both lost their legs. They came here, and on Christmas Day and a day after Christmas Day, both of them were killed with their families through airstrikes. So it's hard. There's stories on all sides. And I think the point here is for us that the responsibility and the hope that we have to have, and I think we, as Nativa said, we owe it to the Palestinians to not give up hope. There's 2 reasons for us to be hopeful. First and foremost is the spirit and the resilience of our brothers and sisters on the ground in Gaza. They've not given up their struggle for freedom. They're tired, they're exhausted, they're being brutalized, they're being treated in a way that's unprecedented in modern history, but they've not given up. They've not surrendered. And that should give us hope that if they can keep struggling in the face of a genocide where 10,000 of their children have been murdered under these terrible American bombs, then we have the duty to be hopeful and to learn from them and to gain from them that energy. The second thing is, again, we've demonstrated individually and collectively that we can change things. We have here a brother from South Africa. If that's not an example that should give you hope, what they overcame and how they liberated their country and achieved a sense of justice, we learn from that. All of the liberation struggles that you worked on, that you mentioned, Algeria and so on, those should inspire us. We learn from history and we act in ways that we can liberate Palestine and free our brothers and sisters there from this terrible occupation and this genocide. It's up to us. It's all in our hearts and in our minds and how we're going to work together. We have to unify, and we have to be very clear that this is a lifelong responsibility and mission. And when we work together, there is hope. If we will leave this room and you just go on to the next issue, or you forget about your responsibility to the children of Gaza, to the people of Gaza, then there is a sense of hopelessness. But I look around, I travel all over, and I meet people all over. The younger generation that was mentioned is totally 100% dedicated to serving this cause and not giving up. And that should give all of us hope. They're educated, they're smart, they're active. they're organized, and I think that's what's going to positively change things. We just need to harness that energy and focus it in a positive way, not to give in to despair, anger, hatred, but use all of those emotions in a positive direction and have a positive impact. In 2009, my Palestinian wife, my beautiful Palestinian wife, died from cancer. She was an amazing woman. During the first major bombing campaign in Gaza in Christmas of 2008 and into 2009, she was in a hospital bed having bumped into her body to try to kill her leukemia. And during that time, she was on the computer constantly trying to arrange medical care for injured children. And when she passed, for me personally, I made a decision that I was going to channel my grief and my own personal despair into something positive. And within 3 years, we built the first pediatric cancer department in her name in Bethlehem. And hundreds of children now with cancer. And that was thanks to literally thousands of people all over the world. It was completely privately funded, and people came forward. And we did it again in Gaza in 2009. We opened another cancer department for children. Things can be done. Just don't give up. We never give up. Our brothers and sisters on the ground there have not given up. We're not going to give up. We're going to keep struggling until freedom. And that's where we get our hope.
Thank you. Thank you.
Maybe just two more. Dr. Feldman, you told me you have a lot of experience over the years going back and forth to Gaza. I assume you also have that sense that we've heard so poignantly of the resilience of the Palestinian people and of people who are in those situations. What do you want to share with us about that?
Well, I absolutely agree. I mean, it is remarkable, the degree of resilience. And I mean, somebody mentioned earlier the, running cars on vegetable oil. I mean, there is nothing like Gazan ingenuity. And so given just half a chance, not even half a chance, the tiniest bit of space for operation, people will make their lives again. If I can, I'd like to maybe just reflect a little bit on my thinking about, I don't know exactly if it's what we need to do, but how we need to think about what we need to do. And I mentioned earlier that I see there's a 75-year danger in thinking about the Palestinian situation as a humanitarian one. There are tremendous humanitarian needs. There's an absolute responsibility for us to address them. But the situation is not a humanitarian problem. It is a political problem. And even the ability to deliver humanitarian aid is political. So David, you mentioned it's a small ask of the Israelis. The reason that things that seem like a small ask don't happen is because, really of our complicity as Americans and the United States government in enabling Israel to feel no pressure to change its behavior. So I think we have a direct, again, we have multiple kinds of responsibilities. So we have responsibility to work on meeting humanitarian needs in whatever way. Again, I'm not a medical provider, so there are other ways, I might give money. We have a responsibility to do that, but we have an enormous responsibility to work to transform the political condition in which certain things are possible and other things are not possible. For me, both, and I'm thinking actually about my colleague on either side, so the South African example, I too came of age during the apartheid struggle and the solidarity struggle against apartheid. And then, Guy, you're mentioning the kind of medical to medical, the ways that there is person to person, community to community pressure. For me, the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement is a crucial tool that we have and to put pressure on Israelis to change their own society, as we need pressure put on us to change our society.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So before I might ask Iman to conclude this very important symposium, I thought maybe, Izzadeen, we'd give you the last word of the panel, if that's okay.
Thank you. There is hope. And we are here because of hope. Hope, you need to believe in it and to act for it. It's not just a word, and we are talking. And sometimes we use these concepts, hope, peace, freedom. They have certain means. And we need to achieve these means. And sometimes why we don't see an end to the current situation, because we heard it today, never again. We have a good saying in Arabic,
The one who is secure from punishment will continue to misbehave. So it's important accountability. And that's what we need, accountability for every act. And that's what we need in this world in order to achieve justice. Otherwise, we will continue to misbehave and will never an end to have to that. So we need to change course. Like a patient, and that's what I say, it's a difficult situation. The patient is in intensive care unit, but we need to ask why the patient is not improving. Because the treatment and the diagnosis is wrong. And even the doctor who is treating it is not fair or ethical or moral doctor. So we need to change the doctor who is working to treat the patient and to seek another opinion. And that's what we need for the Palestinians, because in order to avoid the repetition and what is happening at the current situation. We lost faith in certain mediators. You know, what do I mean? And they are not fair, and I lost faith in them. So we need the international community, because what is happening, I see it, a changing world. You see the awareness about the Palestinian cause. Everywhere, the public opinion, it completely, but do we want to continue downstream, or do we want the upstream to change it? There is still a gap between the downstream and the upstream. So as you mentioned, it's political. We need to put the pressure on the political leadership to put an end to this situation. And that's important. I see the hope also. In memory of my daughters, I established Daughters for Life Foundation. I see women who give life, women who nurture life. This world can be stable, safe, secure, free and just world without women's participation and to be engaged in decision making. And that's what we need the reform to involve women, because who is waging war? Mostly men. So it's time for women to be.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So Iman, if I can ask you to maybe conclude this symposium for us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rick. Before we end it completely, we want to play the message from Dr. Yasser, and then we'll conclude the symposium. I'm sorry.
Well, many people wonder what are the implications, the mental health implications on the population in Gaza Strip, because I'm sure that most of the audience, almost everyone, are following the news and watching the TV, watching the social media, and trying to reach the coverage that shows what really happens in Gaza Strip. The unimaginable number of destroyed houses, killed people, lost infrastructure, injured people, people who are missing until now, maybe under the rubble. More than 100,000 people are either injured or killed or under the rubble. And it's not yet over. And people ask, well, we already knew a couple of years ago by Save the Children that 8 out of 10 children, they have emotional distress and that they need some kind of psychological care. There were various figures talking about how difficult things are for children and for adults. Well, I can say a couple of things. One, we haven't had the chance to let our wounds bleed, if I could say it like that, you know. We didn't have the chance to understand, to process, to contextualize what's happening. I speak at the individual level, at the family level, at the daily life level, when you see people, or when you yourself just run out from a place that was almost bombed, you know, or like near that experience. I mean, we don't have time, we didn't have time to just feel it. The horror is momental because there is another horror that is happening. And then in a few minutes or a few hours, you will be looking for a transportation, for a place that you will stay in, for some food that you will feed your children, for maybe some good water to drink, maybe a problem with taking your child to the toilet in the middle of the night. And that's how things go. You are running from one obligation towards another obligation, an obligation towards your children, your family, your beloved ones. We haven't had any time really to meet our losses, to confront our realities, and even to know what really happened. And part of it, most of the people are still wondering whether their houses are still up or not, whether their residences are fully destroyed or partially destroyed, whether they are going to see their missed ones again or not again. I'm not talking about people who were under the rubble, but also people who were taken from the shelters, from the school, arrested, kidnapped. I don't know what's the exact term to explain what happened to them. And some of them appear 30 days later, some of them appear 5 days later, some of them never appeared, some of them are not sure where they are. There are many people who are gone missing and no one really knows where they are at the moment. And if I could add and come back to the question, the psychological impact, those who were severely affected, extremely affected by the loss of all members of their families, most of them, they have shown very extensive signs of trauma, sometimes full dissociation, sometimes full mutism, sometimes hallucinations even, whatever you can imagine. But most of the population will start showing the impact a couple of weeks or 3 weeks after the ceasefire takes place. And then people will have to deal with the realities, will have to deal with the suffering, will have to deal with the losses that they endured, and will have to deal with the implications, whether these are psychological or material. Well, first of all, ceasefire. This whole thing has to end. Second, an immediate recovery mechanism should be put in place. Let's not make people wait for 1 year as it happened in 2014 until reconstruction began. Many lessons that were learned from the international community. Please go look into the drawers and pick something that worked and do it immediately. Let's not continue having more than 2/3 of the population, perhaps a little bit more, perhaps a little bit less, living in tents for the next year or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. Then immediate intervention with the people who are in need. We speak about the injured first. Second, people with chronic illnesses, medications king. Third, people who are psychologically impacted. The sooner we intervene, the better the results are. And third, we need to rehabilitate the whole context. We need to understand that what our children read in books are not fairy tales, but these are realities. That human rights are not stories to be told, but they are things to be practiced. Living in dignity and living in justice and living in freedom is something our children deserve to see. Thank you very much.
So I want to thank everyone for coming today, and especially thank all the panelists who came from near and far as Palestine, Israel, and as near as here in like Boston and New York, etc. Thank you all for coming. I'll reiterate by saying that you know, if my children, my Palestinian American children, can get a shelter, food, water, education, and access to healthcare here, children of Palestine deserve the same thing. This is the month when we celebrate Martin Luther King, and we wanted to do the event on the 15th, and we decided that we would do it today instead. However, I want to end with a quote. Martin Luther King said in the March for Integrated Schools, "Make a career of humanity. Commit yourself to the noble struggle for equal rights. You will make a better person of yourself, a greater nation of your country, and a finer world to live in." Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. A round of applause for our panelists, please. Thank you.